Thank you for being here. Welcome to the celebration of my beautiful, brilliant, inimitable, curmudgeonly, thoughtful, generous mother, Helen von Schmidt, who died nearly a year ago and left my world, our world, a smaller place. Mom had been telling friends and family for some years that she was ready to go, but that didn't mean we were ready for her to leave. For those who don't know me, although I don't know if there is anyone here actually at this point that doesn't know me, but I'm Helen's eldest daughter, Caitlin. My little sister, Megan, is right there. And Helen's grandsons, Kyle and Thomas, are here. Pete and Tim are not, but she loved them all, even if they didn't show up. I must preface my remarks by saying I am known in my family that as the easiest cry on the planet. So I'm going to do my best. No guarantees. Despite my bad training, Mom never wrote a memoir, which is a shame. Her long life of varied and fascinating experiences, long-lasting friendships, and loving and eccentric family made for stories worth telling. And when I try to conjure them up now and forget some crucial detail, she is no longer here to ask. To try to encapsulate her life in a few hundred words would do her a disservice. To paraphrase Clarence, her life touched so many other lives, and now she's left an awful hole. Some facts are important and clear. She had 2 daughters in the early 60s, and as a divorced single mother, raised them up in Cambridge between Central and Harvard Square. In 1975, she was in the first cohort of women to be admitted to Amherst College, from which she graduated summa cum laude the same year I graduated from Amherst High. Way to steal my thunder, I complained for 5 decades. She was rightfully proud of her 35-year career in the Amherst English department. Her office was right here in Johnson Chapel downstairs. I know from her students and my own experience that she saw every person for who they were and encouraged them to be what they wanted to be, what they needed to be, with a depth of understanding that's hard to find. She was a voracious reader and watcher of movies, which she also taught. She proselytized her favorites from Casablanca to La Jetée to Uncle Buck to the point of bullying. She did the same with books. She had strong opinions, a generous nature, and a disinclination to suffer fools gladly. She loved grocery stores, church fairs, tag sales, candy shops, and the West Concord 5 and Dime. She always remembered just what you needed or wanted, and by God, she would find it, come hell or high water, in some yard or church basement. She played the long game. On my 60th birthday, she re-gifted to me the card I gave her on her 60th birthday. She showed her love not with words, unless they were written, or hugs, but by remembering who you were and what you cared about. How can I sum up the traditions, the routines, the adventures of the 64 years we spent as mother and daughter, as friends? The places we discovered, the complaints we shared, the meals we ate, the wicked gossip, the gleeful telling of the same old stories about the same old people. We called her car the Ventmobile, and we would go there to complain. The many times we thought the same thing at the same time and saying, I was going to say that. We're so much alike, said Mom. I have long thought I would quote, as she often did, Frank Booth from her beloved Blue Velvet when she died. I bet you know what I'm going to say if you know her. Now it's dark. But instead, I will send her off with an inside joke, the title of a 1947 French movie I still haven't seen, in which a bus tour keeps going wrong, but the organizer insists it's all part of the plan. We used that title every time we got lost on a drive or set out without a destination in mind, especially in the pre-GPS days, to soothe ourselves and enjoy the unknown. Voyage surprise, Mom. Voyage surprise. And now, I would like to have up Dale Peterson, her dear friend and colleague.
I want to begin by acknowledging the person who first invited Helen to join the Amherst community. I am speaking of the late, lamented Ed Wall, the former Dean of Students, who had the inspired idea of reviving a post-World War II program at Amherst College, which invited veterans to join the undergraduate body. Ed had the wonderful idea of making it clear that Amherst College would welcome applications from adult learners and autodidacts. And as long as that program existed, it brought into our classrooms the most motivated, most stellar students that we had encountered, certainly that I had encountered. And a few of Helen's cohorts are here today to remember her. I frankly cannot remember exactly when and where I first met Helen, but I know that as soon as I heard her talking, I recognized my own native tongue from the eastern shore of eastern Massachusetts. I wish in my youth I had met her. I realized that it was possible because a small group of my high school friends every year looked forward to what we called the Newport Folk Festival. And if I had known Helen then, imagine the opportunity I would have had. She could have taken me backstage. I could have met Eric Van Schmidt, and I could have heard the UMass Amherst songwriter and singer Buffy St. Marie. That was not to be. My meeting with Helen was much delayed, of course. But we soon discovered that we had things in common. As you all know, Helen could not bypass a tag sale or a flea market or a country fair or an antiquarian bookstore. And I shared with her a lifetime of collecting and clutter. My parents were in the business of auction and antiques, and so I was very familiar with flea markets and with visiting old bookstores. And as a matter of fact, Helen and I developed over the years a competition. We both discovered that you could get in New England bookstores 19th century editions of a writer we much liked, William Dean Howells. And we had a competition as to see how many of those 19th century books we could accumulate. And of course we exchanged them. And I think between the two of us, we read the entire corpus of William Dean Howells. Another way in which Helen was important in our family life is that, of course, it happened quite naturally that she was raising two teenage daughters, as Lorna and I were raising two tiny tots. And so both Caitlin and Megan were babysitters. And I suspect that the fact that my two sons, who in midlife are busy songwriting and taking gigs in retro rock bands, has a lot to do with Caitlin, I'm sure. I'm sure that that's true. Another thing that we had in common is that both of us were infatuated with Brooklyn accents. And of course, in my case, it was a lifetime involvement with Lorna. But for both Helen and me, it was an attraction to being constantly around the inimitable Stanley Rabinowitz. And over the years, we developed a kind of sextet of companions. We had monthly dinners together with Jim Marinus and Gigi Kaiser and Stanley and Helen and Lorna and me. And it added so much to the richness of our lives. Helen was an extraordinary person. She was, as Caitlin said, a voluminous reader. She also had such a wealth of knowledge about film and music. And of course, she ended up being part of the instruction in the English department. And she instructed the faculty as well. I, very fortunately, came across, in preparation for this evening, a quintessential communication from Helen. This is a measure of the care and consideration that she took of the people who were nearest to her hearts. I think of her going to flea markets and always looking for that little unique thing that would mean something to a particular person that she happened to love. And she was the essence of consideration. And for me, I treasure this letter, which was written during COVID. And because we couldn't see one another, Helen decided to send a message to dear Lorna, Dale, and Stanley. And as you listen to it, you will appreciate her dry wit and her gift of friendship. Yesterday, after a totally sleepless night on Wednesday, I set out to donate the warm clothing I had collected for the homeless, only to find out that due to the new pandemic restrictions, none of the usual sites would even take them. I got home with a car full of bags and a very bad disposition. I woke this morning at 3:58. I had been dreaming that the four of us were dining out at what I might once have referred to as a swanky restaurant, which, in spite of being definitely swanky, was located in the grassy space on Ruskin Street between my family home, gray and indistinct on one side, and the much more impressive home of our inevitably pleasant Italian neighbors, the De Stefanos, about whom, after 18 years, I knew nothing more than their name. In the dream, Stanley had not been sure about eating out, but he came anyway. We all studied the menu and ordered the most impressive entrees. After each order, oddly, the waiter went off, only to come back and say it was out. None of us seemed to care. We were all happy. I awoke happy. 2 hours later, inevitably, the details of the dream faded. Some of the dishes we ordered, I could still remember, but I couldn't spell them. The feeling of happiness persisted. In life, as in my dream, your presence has been from the start a blessing for which I have always been and will always be thankful. Happy Thanksgiving, in spite of the pandemic and politics. Love, Helen.
welcome up now Susan Raymond Fick, who was a fixture in the English office and who I heard about almost as often as I heard about my family. I was the assistant to the faculty in the English department and worked with Helen for almost 20 years. I would open the office at 8 o'clock, and Helen would come in early to use the faculty computers to check her email or work on class assignments. We would talk about many topics, and most often about philosophy and families. Knowing that one of my favorite Stoic philosophers was Epictetus, Helen, who loved to browse book sales and used bookstores, bought me a copy of The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. This is a book of short quotes from various philosophers with short explanations of their insights. And I still refer to that book as a reminder of the Stoic ideas and of Helen's thoughtful gift. When discussing our families, Helen would tell me about her grandchildren, and she would always ask me about mine. She was genuinely interested in personal connections. When my daughter would call the office back when kids would use the phone to talk, I would answer the phone, "Hi, honey." Thanks to caller ID, I knew it was her. I don't know if Helen ever knew my daughter's name, but she would always ask me how "Hi, honey" was. After we both retired from college, we would occasionally meet in town to keep in touch and to maintain our personal connection beyond the college. Epictetus said, "Make it your business to draw out the best in others by being an exemplar yourself." Helen was an exemplary advocate, inspiring us to be our best selves. My cousins Leanne and Doug could not be here today because Doug's son is graduating in California. And as Leanne said, Mom would totally get that. But she sent a eulogy, and my sister Megan is going to read it. I'm speaking for Leanne, and this is it. My beloved aunt, Helen was one of the most important people in my life. I am trying to emulate her, which is why I'm in California at my nephew's college graduation and not in Amherst. It was in this vein of paying it forward that my nephew lived with me last summer. It brought me back to the year that I lived with Aunt Helen while in graduate school. Memories flashed of her wearing her apron and preparing my favorite meal, spaghetti carbonara, her doing my laundry, her giving me 2 marks of approval for my chosen outfit before I set off to teach. Her love came in so many forms. After living with Aunt Helen and finishing grad school, I moved in with my older brother. Her influence was apparent when he asked exasperatedly, while watching TV together, "Do you have to analyze the commercials?" Just watch the show. Another byproduct of our time together was discovering our appreciation for a good fart joke, much to her partner's at the time chagrin, which only made it funnier. This morphed into a lifetime of holiday card exchanges, a challenge, if you will, of who could find the grossest card, the themes being farting, pooping, peeing, toilets in general, and nose picking. You get the picture. Every once in a while, a completely sappy, over-the-top, gushy card would be thrown in for luck. Christmas was her specialty. Carefully selected over the entire year, special gifts were double wrapped in tissue paper, then the wrapping paper color assigned to each person. We would get a box with gifts for me, Mom, and Dad. Every Christmas morning, there would be the traditional call. Whose paper was whose? Then an elaborate key with samples of each paper provided, but there would always be an odd gift out, and thus a phone call. My mother, Marcia, joined Aunt Helen this April
the last of the Jones girls. The Louisa May Alcott of her family may have to write about the brother and 4 sisters who could not have been any more different, each one so defined and present. They are all together again, or they are each in their own paradise. I envision my mom and Aunt Helen together on a beach, reading a book, waiting for us to join them one day. I miss Aunt Helen.
There are a few people who couldn't make it here today, and I have asked some dear friends to read what they said. And the first is Nicole Turner. She's going to read for Joe Porter, who was also in that first cohort of students when they went co-ed here at Amherst College.
Hi, I'm Nicole Letourneau, friend of Helen's daughter, Caitlin. Helen's dear friend, Joe Porter, who could not be here today, wrote this remembrance of Helen. Helen was a member of the first class of women to enroll in Amherst in 1975 when she was about 40 years old. During this transition to coeducation, she became my close friend and ally. She and I had both lived in Cambridge, Mass. during the 60s. We both loved film and music. Helen and her brother worked for George Bean's Festival Productions, which produced the Newport Folk and Jazz Festivals. She had been married to the legendary folk singer Eric von Schmidt. Helen had a brilliant intellect, huge heart, quick sense of humor, and abundance of worldly experience. Thanks to her senior's thesis, in defense of the ending of Huckleberry Finn, she became one of the first female students at Amherst to graduate summa cum laude. While taking graduate courses at UMass, Helen contributed to staff courses at Amherst and, beginning in 1981, stepped in to teach more regularly, becoming widely admired for teaching English 11, American literature, composition, and the personal essay, her favorite course. She was also the first to teach film and writing, a staple in the English department, and now also in the Film and Media Studies program ever since. Upon her retirement in 2012, colleagues noted that Helen, quote, taught generations of students how to view the world through moving images and personal reflection, and how to write eloquently from these perspectives, end quote. Helen was predeceased by beloved brother Robert Jones and sisters Barbara Willie and Eleanor Weston. Her dear sister, Marcia McCarthy, died in April of this year. Helen is survived by daughters Caitlin von Schmidt and Megan Richardson, and cherished grandchildren Kyle and Pete von Schmidt, Tim Thornton, and Thomas Tweddell, and great-grandchildren.
Now inviting my friend Reese to play along with a song that I wrote, inspired by a friend's mother's death in the mid-'80s. But even at that time, I knew someday I would be singing it for her. stormy skies. She was someone, now she's wonderful. And there's no one left here, no one left home. In a bedroom, quietly, I need sleep. Wait for footsteps, long cherished and gone. Memories run deep. I'm not lonely, just wondering what to do. I had a love, she's gone. How about you? If you found someone, never let them go. If you love someone, be sure and let them know. 'Cause time slips away and soon your chances will be gone. And the person fades away as the memories linger on. On a hilltop, buried my heart 6 feet down. And the love that gave me life is underneath the ground. And they tell me that she's gone to a brighter, better place. But I'd give anything just to see her face. And they tell me angels sing, good folks gone away. But I'd give anything for just another day. And now, my cousin Radhika Jones.
Brought my pen up here because the bar is very high for Aunt Helen. If I need to make a quick edit, I will do that. I'm Radhika Jones. I'm Helen's niece, the younger daughter of her brother Robert. I never got a chance to study with Aunt Helen officially, but she still taught me the most important lesson I ever learned, which is simply to read all the time and then read some more and keep reading. When I was growing up, Aunt Helen's yellow house at 70 Northampton Road was my ideal space. The books were stacked in piles in the kitchen. They snaked through the dining room into the living room, up the stairs and into the guest rooms. They bulged out of the shelves like living things. It might have seemed to the layperson that they were in disarray, but Aunt Helen knew where every book was, and more importantly, she always knew what book I needed. When I moved abroad after college, Aunt Helen was one of my most faithful correspondents. We exchanged letters and cards, and she sent me books. She'd pick up a Bantam paperback of Portrait of a Lady for $1 at a church sale and wrap it up in brown paper, and off it went to Taipei, where I dutifully read it and reported back to her. Caitlin and Megan recently found a card I wrote to her in December of 1994, 3 months after I had moved to Taiwan, that ended with this postscript. Since leaving home, I've read Candide, The Portrait of a Lady, Dr. Zhivago, The Return of the Native, Mansfield Park, 2 Nancy Mitford novels, Fear of Flying, and The Accidental Tourist. So whatever happens, all this adventuring won't have been a waste of time. Then I wrote, you are the only person who will appreciate this. What I meant was not just that she would appreciate this particular list of books, though I'm sure she did. All those titles are about coming of age and taking risks and navigating chaos, and Aunt Helen would have seen that immediately. She was the most well-read person I ever met, and she had common sense, and she was a great judge of character. She was a triple threat. But in addition to all that, she understood my need to be accountable to someone at a moment when I was newly adult and trying to work out what I was going to do with my life. I knew that literature and reading were going to be a part of it, but I hadn't figured out how. She understood that even if I was having a moment or maybe a year of aimlessness, I didn't want to waste my time. She made sure I kept reading so that I could figure it out. She was that person who held me accountable. Aunt Helen never marked up any of my papers, but she did once mention an idiom she had outlawed in her students' writing. It was the phrase, can't help but. I can't help but wonder, or we can't help but think, or some such. Aunt Helen hated that expression. She said, we are human beings with free will, and we can always help it. I adopted that logic immediately, and when I became an editor, I passed her guidance along to every writer I worked with. Like all the best writing advice, it works for life too. I admired her and loved her so much, and I am so grateful to her. She will always be my ideal reader.
And now I invite up Carl Huckerainen, who was a student with Mom in her early days at Amherst College.
Get out my ad-libs. So, in the preface to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Twain writes, persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot will be shot. I'm so grateful that Dale mentioned Ed Wall, because I was a student at which is a community college in Gardner, where I met my wife Sandra. And about a week before I had stopped into the transfer counselor's office, Ed Wall had visited the mountain. and encouraged him to encourage students to apply. And so the counselor said, why not? And I said, why not? So I wrote an application, and there's a footnote, I was sober a couple of years, and that was part of my story. I actually heard college before. And I get in. And so that summer we had the orientation session on we met, I think on the lawn of the Common, and we were talking, and a classmate, Roger Smith, invited me to his house with a bunch of others, and I believe that's where I met Helen, and that's where I met Dale. No, I met Dale on the Common. We were talking about just life in the path. And so I went there, and that became my community. We would meet in between classes, or sometimes instead of classes, in the snack bar that had been in the basement of Valentine. And, you know, talk about coffee and talk about what the hell are we doing here? Because almost everybody who's in that cluster had come from a place that wasn't the usual path into Amherst. So I talked about these chairs. So I came from Gardner, Mass, where Nicholson Stone was operated. Nicholson Stone made these chairs. And so I knew where the factory was. And when I graduated, my father got one of the chairs and brought it home. And I still have it. It's a wonderful chair. And they're all around campus, and they're really, really special. And that's the legacy of the furniture business in New England. And it's no longer there. It's now a supermarket where the factory had been. So we talked about all kinds of stuff. Because again, wondering what we were here, we were part of this community, we were excited, particularly to take all kinds of courses with really fascinating, smart people, and to rub elbows with people who were really smart, but who seemed to know that they belonged here. So you go into the parking lot and you see Porsches, and BMWs, and other cars. An antique Saab, one of the old three makers. And so we talked about ourselves as much as we talked about what we were learning, and we were tremendously excited, and we were tremendously trying to figure it out. And I should make a note, one of our classmates, Tom Salter, died in the spring. Tom was a Marine, a Vietnam vet. He came here, and he thrived as well, because it was a chance to meet smart people, smart faculty. Politically, we were quite different, but he was a passionate guy, and he operated a veteran shelter in Greenfield for a long time. So it has been crazy about his memory. But we told stories of our lives. Helen mentioned one time she was on a bus in Cambridge, and a woman, there had been an unexpected snowstorm, and a woman got on the bus and they were shaking the snow off and said, "Damn you, Don Kent." So for those of you who didn't grow up in Eastern Mass during that time, Don Kent was the Dean of American Weather Forecasting. He taught you how to understand the weather. He was that important. And he was also, in some measure, responsible for the weather. So if he made a mistake, he heard about it. We talked about all kinds of stuff. The last time I had a lengthy conversation with Helen we met at Denny's in Greenfield. We talked about Newport. I was teaching a senior education class in Bob Dylan, and so we talked about when Dylan went electric. But we also talked about a lot of other stuff, because we always talk about a lot of other stuff. listening to the stories of life, it reminded me of what my mother used to say: the right hope for the right person at the right time. And she was a fierce person with her dissemination. When Amazon came on in the late 90s, and my mother was at the end of her life, but she was in her glory. And the Amazon truck was, stopping at the house almost every day. And it was in that, that spirit I could, relate to Helen, because she too had that fierceness. She was having nothing. She loved people, she loved ideas, and she loved the adventure, the curiosity that I think we all brought with us, and that it was brought to fruit here. And yeah, she's not sufferable, but she brought that curiosity, and it was recognized here. Helen was one of half a dozen women who were invited to Kappa in her graduating class. That was no small feat. It's important to recognize that what this school did was help those of us who kind of didn't belong, feel like at least we belong someplace. We belong with our cohort, and we belong with ourselves. We feel as though something is exciting, something is ignited, and we went the way we went. And so out of that group, as I mentioned, Tommy was our veterans at Greenfield, and another of our classmates went back to his woodworking business in Virginia, and another one was some hippie teacher out on the West Coast, and it's all over the yard, and it's out of that spirit that we all came, and for that time, that time of just sitting around the coffee shop, and talking about stuff that mattered. Sometimes it was, what did we learn, and what class we were in, and sometimes it was just, what did we learn about ourselves? How did we see ourselves? So it was so very important. And now we're at an age where we are saying goodbye to our friends. Some have passed on. Some have developed dementia and are going, the body is still there. But as he said, Judaism, we died twice. Once when we died physically, the second time when people stopped saying our names. So let's make sure that we never stop saying our names. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up Ben Maris, Helen's friend, and also the son of her dear friends, Gigi Kaiser and Jim Maris.
Hello, can you all hear me? When Caitlin told me this event was going to happen, I was kind of intimidated. I'll just give you a little reason why that might be so, if you can't guess already. My relationship with Helen is actually nexus that my friends Seth and Zach probably know pretty well. Helen was my teacher. She was my parents' friend. I think I can speak for the faculty kids on some level, our relationship to her. And the reason why I think it's different is because, at least for us, Helen didn't at all seem like an outsider at Amherst. Helen was someone who many of you can remember meeting her. I can't remember meeting her. She was always here. She was always here because she was always here. There was a way in which this place was always her, at least in some way, something that should know mine. The other reason why I felt it was sort of just a little bit intimidating is because for people in our position, there's a sense in which we're stepping into our parents' shoes. That's terrifying. Because those people who have been here forever and we looked up to for all that time have the effect of making you feel a little bit like you'll always be a child. This is not a bad thing, in my opinion. I've come to see that in retrospect. The reason I say that, another thing that hit me when I got this invitation from Helen was that I didn't know exactly what I'd say about Helen because I've known her my entire life, and like I said, it's hard for me to picture any portion of my life without having her present. But on the other hand, I kind of felt this was something that was doable, in part because it's impossible for me to think about her without thinking of some appreciation, something that's given me joy in my life. Helen, I did not take film and writing from Helen, but I did take a nonfiction film class from Helen. And in retrospect, I'm really glad that I did. The reason why I'm really glad that it was that class particularly is because there's a tendency among people who talk about film, and I am now a film professor, I talk about film every day, to think of nonfiction film as being a true reflection of reality, instead of what it really is, which is a creation of a world outside of our own that is populated by people who are playing versions of themselves. Now, that sounds a little bit phony. I don't mean it that way at all. Playing a version of yourself contains the word play. There is a kind of joy in performance, which I think Helen definitely appreciated at the time that she was talking to us about it. It's impossible for me now to talk about any of the people that she talked about in class back then without thinking of her and thinking of that quality that she imparted to us. And when you have a job like this, you end up spending an inordinate amount of time talking about Ellen Morris, and talking about Werner Herzog, talking about Les Blank, and talking about any of the other people who figured prominently in that class. I was here a couple of weeks ago. Some of you may have been here also for graduation, and then again last week for my reunion here. At graduation, there was an uncanny sense of having gone through this ritual many, many times. I was here because I had a friend whose son was graduating. And the thing that struck me about it this time, I had not been back for many years, was the faculty recessional. That was the permanent event that I think all of us remember from childhood. And the effect that it has had on me, and I think probably the effect it would have on anyone in our cohort, was one that felt like loss. The people that we remember who had been the permanent fixtures of that ritual were not there anymore. Stanley was particularly absent. I don't know if anyone can remember Stanley at those recessionals, but it was like he was the Pope walking among the bishops. Practically hand-kissing through. Helen had a presence that was not precisely like Stanley's, but it did have the sort of uncanny feeling of an outpouring of love from her students back to her. I can remember going through that in my graduation year. I can remember seeing it in other graduation years, and that absence made a particular impression on me. Another thing that hit me a few weeks ago, I don't know if anyone was here for that graduation, it's the first graduation I can remember where it rained, and it was just pitiless rain and wind the entire time. Usually that ritual is like today, it's just sweltering. Everyone can't wait to get out of it. This time it was a little bit different. That made the absence feel a little bit more pronounced. It also kind of put me in this mood where I knew I was going to be talking about Helen in a couple of weeks, and it made me think about this. That quality that she talked about, that's relevant to movies. Every time you walk into a movie, you're walking into a world that is not your own. The world that you're walking into that is not your own has its own rules, whether this is nonfiction or fiction. Those rules that exist in that world that is not your own are in some way engineered to make you feel something, to make you reflect on something that is part of the world in which you live. That coupled with graduation, I don't know, just maybe just caused my thoughts to go down this other road. Virtually everybody that I saw at graduation were would reminisce with me about professors that we had. Helen was very prominent among them, and almost everyone that I know, regardless of what they've gone on to do, remembered the time that we were here, the time that we spent with Helen in class, and the way that we remembered it was as this little sort of moment where you could enjoy the aesthetic of whatever she was talking to you about. And she would talk about it in kind of brilliant ways that made you think about the topic, that is to say, the movies, in ways that you probably hadn't before. And that memory is a sweet one. It's a sweet one that I think all of them will carry. It's certainly something that I carry around, and it creates a real contrast with the many moments in life that await you after you leave here, in which you're not given the space to interact with that world outside of your own. The world outside of your own and the pleasure that it gives you is always valuable. And there's a piece of a poem that I thought of that I thought might be relevant here. This is from Tennyson. It's from a poem called The Lotus Eaters. Some of you might know it. I'm sure some of you do. It's Tennyson kind of imagining the journey of Ulysses, that takes him to an island that is populated entirely by people who eat this substance that is an opiate. So they live in this world outside of their own, but because it's their only foodstuff, it's the only world that they know. It's something that you could look at kind of askance and say this is just escapism. But it's another thing that you could look at, and I think that Helen would agree, and I certainly felt this way, that gives you a view on the life outside of that world that you enter into. And this is one that you could make as reasonable a case for the experience of movies as anything else. The world that waits for you afterwards is one that can be harsh. It's one that can feel as though it's kind of beating you down. It's one that can feel as though it is pointless. But inside the world that you enter into in movies, there is a sense of poetry and drama and beauty that you can carry over into the world you enter into the real world. The hateful world we enter into. Hateful is the dark blue sky vaulted over the dark blue sea. Death is the end of life. Oh, why should life all labors be?
Thanks, Ben. You reminded me that Mom always used to say that God never rained on the Amherst College graduation. I don't know if she had some deal that is now broken, now that she's dead, but just saying. I'd like to welcome out my friend Danny Letourneau, who will be reading for Mom's student, Emily Schmidt Rosenfeld. And Ben, I apologize that I didn't get your year of graduation. The internet failed me. So.
Hello. Thank you. I'm Danny Letourneau. I'm actually a proud recipient of at least one lovely thrift store gift from Helen. That coffee mug with a saying on it that I can't read out loud. Thanks, Helen. This is from Emily Schmidt Rosenfeld, class of 2011. As I write this, I'm sitting in South for my 15-year Amherst reunion. Outside my window, I can see the back steps of Johnson Chapel, where Helen and I once stood during one of our final advising sessions, my senior year. I was her last student meeting of the day, and the conversation prior had clearly been a lot. She stood when she saw me and said, "Emily, come outside." When we settled beside one of those beautiful white pillars, she lit a cigarette and casually smoked it through our meeting. I can't remember anything we talked about, but I remember how she made me feel heard, appreciated, and capable at a time when real life loomed on the horizon, and I mostly felt scared. As a professor, Helen was brilliant, sharp, dryly funny, and engaging. Her classes were a showcase of her love of both the subject at hand and the practice of teaching. The first class I took with Helen was film and writing. When my younger sibling, then a sophomore in high school, visited me the week we were studying The Wild Bunch, Helen gladly welcomed them into our class. Helen asked us about the film's allegory and the the room was silent. My sibling leaned over to me and whispered, "It's the Vietnam War." At which point Helen said, "You are allowed to speak too. Please go ahead." My sibling answered the question, Helen smiled, and then mocked all of the college students for being outshined by a high school sophomore. As a person, Helen was a gift. By sheer coincidence, or perhaps fate, Helen advised both me and my husband before we ever met. She once caught us kissing between classes on the stairs in Converse. When she realized who we were, she smiled and said, "That makes sense. Carry on." Though she was not able to make it to our wedding, every year on our anniversary, a card from Helen would arrive at our house. In one, she called us the king and queen of the prom. I wish she could have met our son. One year, her card arrived with a small package, a t-shirt with Amherst, capital H-E-R, printed across the front, the her in the center in large capital letters. Her note said it was hers from the early days of Amherst coeducation. It didn't fit her anymore, but she knew someone it might. I'm wearing that shirt now, at Amherst, as Johnson Chapel is emblazoned with a banner celebrating the 50-year anniversary of Amherst going co-ed. I feel her everywhere around me in this place, a place where I know so many chapters of her life were written. I am so grateful to have been a page in that extraordinary story.
I welcome up my cousin Melanie Jones.
I brought my computer because Helen emphasized revision. So Helen was first of all that. She was my aunt. But when I was still young, she became one of my first correspondents. Cards from her were tiny gems. They generally accompanied books, and she was particular in thinking about what each of us individually might enjoy reading. But occasionally she sent other treasures from tag sales or church fairs, and once, for me, a full blonde wig. This was a real one, not from a costume shop. I might have been 8. Looking back, I wish I'd asked about its provenance, not least because I did put it on my head. But in part because I wonder now in what consignment context she could possibly have found the perfect response to my growing irritation that the heroines in all the books I was given in school were blonde. The next time she saw me, Helen asked if I liked the wig. I had to confess that although I tried it on with genuine hope, my adventures as a blonde had been a failure. I did not look right, I told her, and she managed not to laugh. Remember, she told me, there are many ways to be a heroine. Of course, she was one of mine, one of the most remarkable people we will ever know. She championed what was genuine, both in writing and in her insistence always on real butter. She had no use for margarine or other weak substitutions, no use for euphemisms or hyperbole, for vagueness or imprecision, for false drama or false conclusions or falseness of any kind. This extended to her understanding of people. She had no use for charlatans either, as I learned during a dynamic viewing over several days of the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, which we watched together. She was observant, attentive, and deeply, broadly, humanely curious, all qualities that distinguished her teaching. She was truly interested in her students, in our backgrounds and families, in what brought us to Amherst, in my case, really her, in whatever interested us, and in what any of us might do next. She was attuned to beauty, I think, in all its forms. Peonies, a really good front porch, ideally with a swing. Ocean swells on a gray day, a Van Morrison song, or Pat Barker novel, or favorite film sequence from Touch of Evil, which she showed me constantly. I don't think she ever failed to notice the light before a storm. The subject of one of her last emails to me was, appearances matter. She was referring to the importance of trees on a campus. And she made a point of expressing her appreciation for whatever beauty she came across. Walking back from a college choir concert once, she marveled that to her, gospel music made it possible to believe, briefly, in what she did not otherwise believe. She had little patience for squeamishness, snobbery, flaccid logic, or despair. As housemates, we endured squirrels in the walls with what was, for me, totally false composure. Once, in my early 20s, when I was discouraged about what I might do or could do or really, really could not do, she settled me on her red couch with brownies and a movie in the VCR. Ben, you might have studied this movie in that nonfiction film class. It was Silver Lake Life, The View from Here. Yeah. It turned out to be a chronicle of a couple's life as they declined together from AIDS. She checked on me about an hour and found me weeping after one partner dies on film. See, she pointed out, you are fine. She was not afraid to call out excess in any form. As students, we encountered this in her margin notes. Is this really what you mean? Appeared frequently on my papers. A quiet challenge in tidy blue script. In our family, though she welcomed visitors, she kept track of how long it took any of us to drive to see her. Part of a diligent campaign to curtail highway speeding, she referred to one cousin regularly as Leadfoot. When first my brother and then I began to take an interest in birds, Helen saw the danger immediately. Do not go overboard, she warned me. You have work to do. The following year, when I joined her for a cup of tea at sunrise, she endured a few minutes of birdsong before saying with pained generosity, you may tell me what these birds are if you must. She loved color. Her aesthetic was so persuasive that many of us believed the best kitchens must be blue or red. She also loved colorful conversation, one of many reasons she loved her friends so much. And she loved teaching. In the spring of my senior year, she finally agreed to let me take composition, the writing course she taught at the time. We wrote brief autobiographical essays addressing assigned topics, and when invited, read them aloud. Week after week, I sat in her classroom and felt astonished by what other students, people sitting quietly next to me, had written about their own lives. I learned more about clarity and purpose in her writing class than any other in all the years and workshops that came from me. But what I remember best is the way Helen listened to those student pieces, her engagement and her warmth, as she helped us move closer to whatever we might discover next, on the page or in our lives. We were so lucky to have her.
Hello. Now I welcome our old friend, no offense, our pseudo-uncle, Jim Rooney. Mom and I were big fans of Northern Exposure, and when we saw the last episode, we fell in love with the song that's played over the final montage. And it wasn't until later that we found out that Jim had produced that album. So we felt like, brush with greatness. Now we're going to do that song. And you know the sun's setting fast, street beside the red neon light. That's where I met my baby on one hot summer night. He was so tender and I ordered a beer. It's been 40 years and I'm still sitting here. But you know the sun's setting fast, and just like they say, nothing good ever lasts. So go on now and kiss it goodbye, but hold on to your lover 'cause your heart's bound to die. Go on now and say goodbye to our town, to our town. I can see the sun setting down on our town, on our town. Good night. It's here I had my babies and I had my first kiss. I walked down Main Street in the cold morning mist. Over there is where I got my first car. It turned over once, but then it never went far. But I could see the sun setting fast, and just like they say, nothing good ever lasts. Go on now and kiss it goodbye, but hold on to your lover, 'cause your heart's bound to die. Go on now and say goodbye to our town, to our town. I can see the sun setting down on our town, on our town. Good night. I buried my mama and I buried my pa. They sleep up the street beside that pretty brick wall. I bring them flowers about every day, but I just gotta cry when I think what they say. If they could see how the sun's setting fast, and just like they say, nothing good ever lasts. So go on now and kiss it goodbye, but hold on to your lover, 'cause your heart's bound to die. Go on now and say goodbye to our town, to our town. I can see the sun setting down on our town, on our town. Good night. Now I sit on the porch and watch the lightning bolts fly, but I can't see too good, I got tears in my eyes. Leaving tomorrow, but I don't wanna go. I love you, my town, you'll always live in my soul. But I can see the sun setting fast, and just like they say, nothing good ever lasts. So go on, I gotta kiss it goodbye, but I'll hold to my lover, 'cause my heart's bound to die. Go on now and say goodbye to my town, to my town. I can see the sun set down on my town, on my town. Good night. Good night.
Well, this is so wonderful listening to all these stories about Helen. I know her for a long time, since she was first married to Eric von Schmidt, and Caitlin and Megan, and so she just was one of those people that, oh good, there's Spot the engineer here, I just played with a dead mic, but we go through it, and any rate, she just had so many qualities that you've already heard about, and I'm not going to talk too long here. This is a song, I changed my mind. I had a song with John Prines I was going to sing called Only Love, but this is another one, a John's song, and it just seemed to suit Helen's personality, it's called Fish and Whistle. I've been thinking lately about the people around me, about the harbors on the corner and the hole in the street. How my uncle's hurt, the shoes on my feet, and I wonder if I'll live to see tomorrow. I was in the army, but I never dug a trench. Busted the knuckles on my nutmeg wrench. And then I go to town and drink and give the girls a pinch, but I don't think they ever even notice me. Oh, Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us, we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we don't turn blue, and we'll whistle and go fishing in hell. Fish and whistle, whistle and fish. Eat everything that they put on the dish. When we get through, I'll make a big wish they will never have to do this again. Again. On my very first job, I said, thank you and please. They made me scrub a parking lot down on my knees. Then I got fired for being scared of bees, and they only paid me 50 cents an hour. Father, forgive for what we must do. You forgive us, we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we go turn blue, and we'll whistle and go fishing. Whistle and go fishing. Whistle and go fishing. The lectern here. I saw quite a lot of people on this podium. I went here 70 years ago, and not too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I got one of those cards from Helen. I seem to recall you had this man as your professor when you were here. This is John Moore. And John Moore was a very, very unusual teacher. I came here, as I said, just about 70 years ago as an 18-year-old freshman, and I was very fortunate to have John as my teacher for the next 4 years, and he was the closest thing to kind of a Socratic teacher you would ever want to have. So he took over the humanities course here just after I left, and he was the chair of the faculty group, and he wrote these letters to his colleagues about teaching, and they came to be known as his pastoral letters. And so Helen sent this to me, and I can tell that she read it because there are certain things underlined here. And I just wanted to read, I can't go on too long here, but John Moore was just an extraordinary teacher. And I think Amherst, I must say, over the years, has shown a very high tolerance for teachers that are a little out of the realm of standard academic career. And the fact that Helen came into this community says volumes, as does Biddy Martin. This school, I think, is a very unusual place, and I'm happy to be associated with it. But at any rate, I'm going to read just a little bit of one of these pastoral letters, and I'll mention where Helen underlined it. This is December 11, 1961. Joe Epstein, who was a professor of philosophy here, has made an important suggestion to me. It goes like this. An ideal student in the humanities would be a sensitive and fine intelligence committed to the assumption that the book is profound and will reward his effort to understand it, but presumably ignorant of the historical and cultural context to which it belongs. The book itself is his only window on that. He endeavors to understand the book to read it by conducting a dialogue with it that asks the imaginative questions and is skilled in looking to the text for the answers. Now, Joe's point is this is John Moore speaking here, that our first aim as teachers of humanities must be to help such a student get as far as he can in just this task she's underlined at, and to help his less gifted fellows to rise to his level of insight, not, Helen's underlined, to supply additional information or contextual material, nor yet to impose our own interpretation of the book. All this strikes me as entirely persuasive and right. In a way, it constitutes a criticism of a certain tendency in my letters to recommend too firm a program for a class hour. Another advantage, granted we have more experience and more general education than the freshmen, each of us finds themselves sometimes, with respect to particular books, in much the same position as that of the ideal freshman described above. My point is that, this is underlined here, in some ways, this is a very good position to be in. It forces us to rely on intelligence and not expertise. And certainly a student is far better off if he emerges from humanities at the end, after many hours of excited exploration, underlined, of our books, than if he is merely improved by the same hours spent in an even excellent interpretive treatment imposed by the insistent pressure of authority. I think Helen followed that advice to a T.
I invite our friend Jennifer Stromston up to attempt to read without crying Mary Anderson Casablanca's. Good luck.
From Mary Anderson Casablanca, student. I found her terrifying at first, but it wasn't for the obvious reasons. No, it wasn't that she only wore black, or, as the heaviest smoke I've ever known, always appeared to be coming out of arrangement a cloud. It wasn't even that oh so casual way she dropped the best anecdote you've ever heard about one of the unbelievably cool people she spent time with before returning to academia. Dylan, Schmillen, genius, genius. I don't care who you are, you pick up your cigarette butts. No, what terrified me was just how concerned she could be about you, how deeply interested she was in what you had to say. On a campus where hands shot up before professors finished questions, where cleverness often passed for insight, her unimpressed, you can do better and you owe it to yourself. Big man energy stood out. Like the documentary filmmaker she taught us to admire, she had an uncanny knack for asking the right question at the right moment, for knowing just when to zoom in. You would be prattling along in class, and just when you began to wonder if she'd wandered outside for a cigarette break, she'd interrupt. And before you knew it, the two of you were off to the races working. It wasn't until after class, walking back to her room or to the cafeteria, that you realized how deftly she had steered you away from your own easy answers, how closely she must have been listening. She was the only professor who noticed the ways I tried to cover up my southern accent. As the proud owner of a working class accent, she would scold me. You let them flatten you out? That's on you. It would be nice to think she and I had some sort of special once-in-a-lifetime connection, but it wouldn't be true. She wasn't a rock star professor, but she was many other people's favorite. At least she would have been if she'd let us call her that. Maybe it was because she had not spent her early adulthood in the way most of her colleagues had, in seminar rooms with other smart people trying to prove themselves worthy of the tenure track. She spent her early years in ways far more ordinary, struggling to pay bills, raising babies, as well as extraordinary. Married to a folk singer, hanging out with every cool person that anyone's ever heard of. But for whatever reason, Helen had neither curried nor valued her favor. On a campus of princely men, she was a civil, prescient, earthly, a rock crystal, brilliant, jagged, undervalued, in a sea of fool's gold. If you're lucky enough to have had a teacher as good as Helen, you know the spell that they cast never entirely goes away. A couple of months before she died, she said something nice about something that I wrote about David Lynch on Facebook. And you would have thought that I won the book. When I called her because I'd seen a movie that I had some big thoughts about, she would always steer me away from the topic at hand back to my life. Where are the toddler pictures? She never let me forget that there's a difference between the movies you watch and the one that you live. One's important and the other, everything. I knew what she meant, agreed with it somewhat, but wasn't convinced I would ever get over my freshman girl need to impress. But then I found out she died, and my first thought wasn't, oh, I was supposed to be something right now, but was grief that there would be no more chicken postcards with ancient forever stamps arriving in my mailbox. No Betty Davis VHS tapes I wouldn't be able to throw out even though I don't have a VCR, I haven't had one in decades. In her leaving, she had managed somehow to at last have broken through. She was always subtle, and that was her magic. If you'd asked me when I graduated from her class, what image from her class I'd expect to stay with me the most over the next few decades, I would not have hesitated. The scene in Herzog's Fitzgeraldo, where Klaus Kinski rides his ruined boat down the Amazon Rapids, lasting opera into the jungle. I wouldn't have been wrong exactly, I still admire the scene deeply. But over the years, I find myself returning to it less and less. In contrast, there's one scene I find myself returning to again and again. It's a quiet scene, distinctly lacking the romanticism of the one from the Herzog movie. It's not from a movie Helen recommended, or any movie at all, but from a story she told at her retirement gathering. It's a single mother, up too late, sitting alone at a kitchen table, reading the Boston Globe, smoking, of course. She stabs out the cigarette and is folding the paper up when she notices a small ad looking for older women to enroll as undergraduates, an ad taken out by a prestigious college in Western Mass. She reads it again. Interesting, impossible with girls, of course. She stands up, she walks over to the trash to throw away, and she stops herself. Over the past week, I've returned again and again to that image of a tired woman, standing over the trash can, trying to decide whether or not to throw out a newspaper. I paid off my student loans a long time ago. The debt I owed to that woman, trying to decide whether to give herself a chance, and the teacher she grew up to be, is one I cannot